You're now listening to the Engage the Rockies podcast, your go-to podcast for local and state issues concerning Colorado.
Hello, Rockies. This is Sarah Jane Maroney, your host, and welcome to this week's episode. We are joined by DJ Summers of the Common Sense Institute. He is the Director of Policy and Research, oversees the stages of CSI's fellows and research staff, coordinates with partners, iterates and analyzes projects, and breaks down findings for the public legislators and commercial leaders. Prior to CSI, DJ attended the University of Utah and Syracuse University. He worked as a journalist, investigator, and political researcher across the U.S. from Washington, D.C. to Alaska. DJ has a drive to understand complex truths and make them clear and accessible to the public and its leaders alike. DJ lives in Denver and is a classically trained pianist. He devotes his spare time to practicing and studying music, and when not at the piano bench, he has a regime of strength training, combat sports, and enjoys a good Colorado beer. We welcome him. Welcome, DJ.
Hello, thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
We're thrilled. So we're talking to you. You are the Director of Research, is that right?
I am Director of Communications and Research Operations for the Common Sense Institute. Yeah, I've been here since September 2023.
Okay, and we have had Common Sense Institute on before. Kelly Caulfield has been on twice, but I don't know that we have a good understanding of the background of CSI and what it does.
So CSI, Common Sense Institute, is a non-profit, non-partisan research firm. What we try to do is inject the best class data analysis into the pieces of the public conversation that need it the most. Wherever the conversation is hottest, wherever the policy squiggles are, sticky points, that's where we try to aim all of our data analyses so that we can protect and promote Colorado's economy, abiding by the best free market principles.
Awesome. Free markets is definitely something Engage the Rockies is for.
So, I mean, you've got to You got to have that in the repertoire here.
Absolutely. So, okay, today we're going to be focusing in a little bit on the general topic of public safety. Before you give me a background, obviously something that is on everyone's minds right now is a bill that is before the Colorado legislature, SB3. So this would I guess that some from proponents of it would say that it wouldn't restrict, whereas the opponents of it say it does restrict firearms purchase, but there would have significant impact on public safety. So could you give us first a background of public safety, and then could we look a little bit, obviously both of us aren't saying one way or the other which way to go on these bills, but they do have an impact.
Sure. I mean, with the conversation with Colorado's public safety is probably one of the top three right now. Whenever any policy leaders get together, whenever any commercial leaders get together, the public generally, like the public discourse right now is aimed at just a few conversations most heavily. They want to talk about the increasing cost of living, and they want to talk about safety. Safety is a big umbrella, and there's a lot that goes into our discussions of public safety at the Colorado level. But broadly, Coloradans know that something has changed here in the last 10 and especially in the last 5 years. Did not used to be that Colorado was a state that brought to mind any kind of criminal element, public safety concerns. That wasn't the case in the early 2010s and the late 2000s. Anytime before this big population influx happened and exploded, really made Colorado the state that it is now, Colorado was regarded as a very safe middle American place to live, where you didn't need to worry about the kinds of urban problems that characterize other states with really big metro areas. You know, think Chicago or Los Angeles or New York City, or to a lesser degree like Seattle, places like that. It wasn't really in the same echelon. We weren't talking about it along the same terms, and something has changed over the last 10 and especially 5 years to put it on the map into that realm, into the realm where those other big urban area characterized states, where they have their conversations about public safety. Crime has gone up, and our exposure to overdose deaths has gone up. There's more general homelessness around in the metro area. All of those have really characterized people's understanding and their perception of what's happening in the state of Colorado. And unfortunately, there's a lot of data to back that perception up. There's a lot of data that's come out that we've analyzed here at the Common Sense Institute in our proprietary independent view. We're not trying to make anyone look worse or better. But there's a lot that's come out that we've analyzed that's tracked this and validated that view that public safety is just, it's just getting worse here in Colorado. We used to be ranked much more highly comparative to other states. In 2021, we were ranked 29th in public safety for our public safety index is what we call it. Common Sense Institute has a range of indexes that we offer. This is our free enterprise index, and it takes a bunch of different variables in a few key policy areas and analyzes how our state compares to other states in its performance. In public safety, we used to be ranked 29th relative to other states. And that was, again, it's not the best. We weren't the best, but we were relatively safe, putting all of those more dangerous areas aside. In 2023, we ranked 43rd. We dropped 14 spots in our public safety index over the space of a decade. That's not good news. That's very bad news. Public safety is a huge issue when it comes not just to people's general health and general welfare, but it's a huge issue when it comes to the economy. Crime is not good for the economy. Crime has a very heavy costs associated with it. I can get into that later, but it scares people away from making investments. It scares people away from patronizing particular businesses if it's a high crime area. It will discourage people from investing in real estate or from developing their own property. In a state like Colorado, where we have a very low birth rate, it can also discourage people from moving in, which our state relies on in order to get new people, new workers to fuel our economic life. We can't rely on that so much when people aren't moving in. They're not willing to move in because there's this perception that it's not as safe as it used to be. So that's the general umbrella here. That's the general context that we're talking about when we talk about Colorado's public safety, that it's just gotten worse by a lot of metrics. Now, that's in large part because of the crime rate. In 2023, we were 8th in the nation for our violent crime rate. We were 4th in the nation for our property crime rate, according to FBI stats that CSI analyzed. That's pretty bad. I mean, we're in the top 10. We're far from being a top 10 safest state in the union anymore. And a large portion of that just has to do with increasing crime more than anything else. There are many metrics that we use in that public safety index, but the crime rate alone is what really scares people. That's really what gets people's feathers ruffled. And we can get into some of those other elements to our crime index, to our public safety index, but the crime rate itself, that's the attention-getting one, and that's the one that drives people a little bit nuts.
Yeah, I saw somewhere that we're behind Milwaukee, and I went to high school there, so I had some reference to this point. And not only that, but obviously the Congress interviewed, the House Oversight Committee interviewed, Chicago and LA and Denver. And I don't think 10 years ago, Denver would have been on that panel. So it is a very real thing. So what do we do with this information? I mean, as I said, that circling around to SB3 and what's before the legislature, do you think most proponents of those are considering these statistics?
I think everyone is. Now, we at Common Sense Institute have not done an analysis on SB3. That's not the kind of issue that we generally come in with. We don't engage on some of those issues that don't have like a direct economic import. But I think the discussion around SB3 is so important because it touches on people's perception, and people's perception is influenced by the data that we're talking about here. You can pick any number of things that say people are more fed up with crime here in Colorado. We ran an analysis of the Back the Blue ballot that passed last year. This was Proposition 130. If you remember, that proposition dedicated $350 million towards recruitment and retention for local police agencies. The operating theory here is that we just don't have enough boots on the ground in terms of police, and that's influencing our crime rate. And people came out and voted very strongly in favor of that ballot initiative, because it turns out Colorado has fewer police per capita than the national average. We have fewer police with arresting powers per national average. What happened is that at a certain point in the last 10 years, police agencies began hiring more civilian than they did uniformed officers. And I think people have noted that difference. People have noted that the police departments here just don't seem to be as present as maybe the crime rate might necessitate. So they were willing to vote on this ballot initiative that gave a huge amount of money to police agencies. Things like that are very in the public eye. People are reacting to the state of public safety here in Colorado. And it characterizes everything. It characterizes ridership with RTD. We ran a report on RTD ridership and RTD development last spring. This effectively analyzed what was happening with RTD ridership. And it was just going down. RTD ridership isn't going down, or is going down. It's not doing very well generally. It's spending a lot of money, doesn't seem to be justifying itself with its ridership numbers, making a lot of money box and fare revenues. So a big portion of that is people's perception of safety on RTD ridership. Like, it's very difficult for people to even know who they're supposed to call, which jurisdiction, who has arresting authority on an RTD station, how much crime is even occurring on RTD. The data collection there is not really up to par with a lot of other police agencies. People know these things are happening, and they don't really know what to do about them except to ask for more police. RTD has pumped up its police force in response. The mayor of Denver has talked about, crime is going down. Everyone, please come back downtown. Everyone is talking about these issues, and they're all showing up at the box, and they're all showing up in legislative action. They're showing up in people's transit habits. People are listing public safety. Their perception of public safety is one of the reasons they're not going to downtown Denver anymore, which is contributing to this office vacancy rate that we have downtown, and just the borderline emptiness that you see in downtown Denver. People are voting with their feet on the crime issue, on the public safety issue. They're not patronizing businesses that are located in high crime areas. They're trying to issue more money to get more officers, more uniformed officers on the ground. They're not going to public transit because their perception of their own safety is tarnished. All of these are the same forces, I think, that probably influence how people think about SB. They're thinking about SB3 in this greater context that's influencing what we do as Coloradans when that crime rate goes up, when everyone kind of acknowledges and has the data to prove that this place just isn't as safe as it used to be. That's, the tenor of the conversation around SB3, I think, speaks directly to that knowledge and that shared anxiety that we all have right now over Colorado's public safety.
Yeah. And so we will include a link to CSI, but you have a bunch of reports out. And I understand this is some insider information that you're going to have a crime report out soon. Is that right, or something?
We're going to have a crime report that will be out by the airing of this show. Now, this crime report talks a lot about how local jurisdictions have had some impact on their respective crime rates. This is another issue that's in the legislature, whether or not municipalities can make criminal sentences above and beyond the state guidelines that are set by Colorado. This was most crucial in Aurora. Aurora implemented mandatory minimum sentences for auto theft offenders. As you might remember, Colorado was top of the charts nationally for its auto theft rate. That really kicked off in the early 20s, and it's gotten a little bit better. But we took that mandatory minimum and put it into what's called a market model. It just kind of analyzes supply and demand to see how much those mandatory minimums were impacting auto theft rates in Aurora. And it turns out that they decreased the auto theft rate in Aurora by 6%. which is a very, very good result for them. Obviously, auto theft is still a problem, and we're still finding new ways at the local and state levels to try to deal with it. But that's a big impact. If you take that associated cost of crime, that's tens of millions of dollars in lost property and in intangible costs that they're saving at the local level from those mandatory minimums.
So we interviewed George Brockler, who stood up the new 23rd Judicial District. Is your study prior to that or after that? Like those statistics, since they just began operating in January, were not incorporated into that study, correct?
Correct. We just went off of the raw crime rate for auto theft that was occurring. We did this analysis for the 20 largest cities in Colorado. We did it for, large counties statewide as well. We also did an adjacent study for shoplifting just to see what the associated cost would be, assuming that 3 to 6% decline in respective crime rates.
Right. So maybe this is a controversial question, but CSI comes with just the data, right? Oftentimes you find that various municipalities, organizations will do studies. And from my best look at the situation, and I don't know a lot, I'm not a researcher, but they often contradict what CSI says. And you guys are very, very data, and right? You're just looking at the facts. And yet every time I see this, I see CSI saying, well, no, it'll cost X amount of dollars, or the fiscal impact is such. And then whatever study it is like, oh, no, it's only this. That doesn't make any sense to me. Why is there such contradiction in various different studies that are done from about the same subject?
I think our biggest value add as CSI is that we're truly an independent voice. We only look at things from an economic angle. We're not associated with any of the larger government bodies. We aren't associated with any of these organizations that might have their own internal data and their own silo from which to approach these questions. We're very independent. We exist as a third party. Also, I think our insistence on making it economically driven is something that might contribute to that. We've got independent economists, PhD economists who do the work here. They may or they may not have just a different way of looking at it than whoever comes up with those studies on a city level or on a state level. And there's always room for disagreements. Usually when two studies disagree, you get into the guts of them and find out that they just made different assumptions. That's more often than not the case.
Okay. And so what else is on the horizon that Coloradans need to know about our economy? And I mean, everyone is feeling the crunch at the grocery store with their bill being 3 times what it was previously. And you see all those memes with how many groceries you got in 2019 versus 2025. And it's a real thing. But what else besides, I mean, obviously public safety does impact this if you're taking the RTD to the grocery store, right? It's overreaching. But what else is on the horizon in terms of economy in Colorado and what is going on?
Well, our economic outlook is really characterized by a lot of what you just mentioned, by cost of living concerns. That's very, very pertinent to most people. We talk about this slate of issues that kind of dominate the conversation right now. Public safety is one of them. Cost of living is one of them. And housing is another one. We know that we just don't have enough housing units to go around. Our analysis says that in the Denver metro area, we're short between 40 and 100,000 units of housing. One of the factors that makes the cost of housing just go up. So a lot of our work focuses on some of the policy decisions that need to be made in order to help that out. With the housing conversation, that's things like reducing condo defect litigation so that condo developers can offer more cheap owner-occupied housing than is currently on the market. They can develop that a little bit quicker. Increasing or decreasing permitting times is another big one. We try to focus on what's coming out to ease the housing supply, how municipalities are developing rules and regulations, or more likely streamlining their rules and regulations so that we can get more homes built more cheaply, more quickly, so that that price can come down. Those are the kinds of conversations that are really dominating right now, is how can we trim costs for housing, for cost of living all around? A lot of the conversation is about what is creating those costs. Is this just a feature of corporations and companies raising prices because they can? Or is this a feature of the regulatory environment being overly burdensome for all of these companies and for these producers? Typically, what we find at the Common Sense Institute is that it's the latter, that usually there are costs of regulatory compliance that make operating a business more expensive than they otherwise would be. And that's just, it just gets exacerbated by this public safety issue as well, where people aren't able to operate because they don't have the same amount of foot traffic that they used to in a certain area, or because they're just not getting the same kind of investment that they did because Colorado's competitiveness as a business-friendly climate might be slipping a little bit. Those are the kinds of conversations that we're having at the Common Sense Institute. They're definitely the kind of conversations that lawmakers, policymakers, industry leaders, they're having as well. So most of the conversations coming out are about how exactly is it that we make this place safer and more inexpensive to actually live.
Yeah, we did interview Roger Lovell from Regional Building and Jill Gigler from the Pikes Peak Housing Network, speaking specifically into Colorado Springs and the amount of units that we're short here. So it is very much of an issue. In terms of public safety, just to circle back finally, most people's perception is, well, you need more police. And from my understanding, that not that that's a bad thing, not that we don't need more police, but that it's not just as simple as having more police. Could you speak into that a little bit?
It's not just as simple as having more police, but that does play a factor. You can track the presence of uniformed police officers with arresting power and see that some municipalities increased that rate. They hired more officers with arresting powers as Colorado's crime rate went up, and they saw a subsequent decline in their crime rate that worked in Colorado Springs. In the Denver metro, it was kind of the opposite story. The crime rate went up, and our number of uniformed officers per crime rate also went up. That's feature of the debate here is how many uniformed officers do you need per population, per crime rate? Generally, what we found in Colorado is that the cities that hired more police when the crime rate went up have fared better than the cities that didn't. That's not the only thing that makes a difference. Sentencing guidelines will make a difference. What happens to incarcerated individuals after they exit the correctional system makes a big difference. Presence of police patrols, people's individual autonomy with how much they might engage with a security firm or actually call things in. Those are all features as well. This is a very, very multi-faceted conversation when we talk about public safety. It's never just one thing. They don't exist in a vacuum. And unfortunately, a part of the public conversation usually wants to hone in on just one thing.
Right. So final question for you. You've been with CSI for a little bit now, and you are obviously focused on the data. You like crunching numbers. How did you come to say, that's really what I want to do?
It was kind of a long and circuitous route. I took the windy scenic road there. I started out as a reporter a long time ago, what feels like a long time ago anyway. 10 years ago, I took a job as, out of grad school. I was writing for Fortune magazine back east for a little while, but I took a job in Alaska working for a business newspaper because I wanted to get away from the density of the East Coast. And what I found when I was working that beat, I was covering the commercial fishing industry. What I found was that everyone brought out some kind of number in order to justify their preferred policy decision. And I knew that at some level it had to be, massaged so that everyone could try to steer it where they wanted it to go. So I really got into data analysis as a way to check what the public conversation was, to make sure that the numbers that I was looking at, the numbers that everyone else was looking at from my articles were clean, that they weren't leading to a particular conclusion. I did that more and more and more. I ended up being on the air here locally at one of our local broadcast stations as their data reporter, trying to do the same thing. trying to inject the very best level-headed data analysis so that the public conversation could be steered toward the truth, not just towards one person's particular preference. And I eventually ended up here at CSI because it was an organization that did exactly that. It was an organization set up to help me do exactly what I'd set out to when I was still working as a reporter.
Awesome. Well, at Engage the Rockies, we are big fans of Common Sense Institute, and we'll put the link there. And DJ, I've learned so much. Maybe you could come back again and discuss further afield from public safety.
I would be delighted. I have got so much data swimming around in my brain.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I've had a great time.
Thank you for listening to the Engage the Rockies podcast, your go-to podcast for local and state issues concerning Colorado.